So the fuel now coming from the water through the electrical polarization process going into resonance. Resonance meaning that we're actually tuning into the dielectric properties of water.
The introduction to his patents explains that all forms of electrolysis are of the prior art. And he also says this is a new high technology. And it's simply because what Stan was keeping secret and what he was paranoid about wasn't in the patents. He patented round his invention. And it had nothing to do with electrolysis at all. Although everyone has had problems with the injector bobbing every time it dead shorts. It burns out. Every time you use the equipment in a dead short condition, it burns out. So everyone basically is making the cells up and making the equipment and trying to do some form of electrolysis in a dead short condition, relying on the fact that the chokes are going to hold back the amps, which they will do. But what people don't really realise on the overview of the whole circuit is that at every turn the circuit is designed to increase voltage and restrict amps. And so what Stan shows you is that there's a diode in, so it can't be a resonant circuit. It won't resonate as such on its own, from what Stan shows you. But there's a diode there, and the diode really doesn't look. It stops the circuit from flipping. Stops when the coils collapse. It keeps the voltage going in one direction. Now we all know that, but the problem with that is in a dead short condition is it doesn't really keep the voltage going in a one direction. So my conclusion is quite simple, that there's two ways to make a water capacitor, and the essence of a capacitor is that it has an insulated film and it does not pass electricity. Now, water is conductive. It's a dielectric liquid, but it makes a terrible dielectric for a capacitor. So, but it does conduct electricity because it's a dielectric liquid. Now, if you can, there's two ways, there's actually three ways, but there's two sensible ways that you can connect up and make a water capacitor out of the given components. And remembering Stan did say that the patent office, we tweaked the cell in such a way. But what I'm suggesting is that the capacitor is not two tubes in a bath of water. The capacitor is one tube. And that tube has a very, very thin, appropriate dielectric resin coating. Not totally non-conductive, and would probably harden like a mica. And what happens is that you have one tube with a dielectric coating, and that's 2/3 of a capacitor. You've got one electrode and the dielectric. So in some ways, every time you coat a tube, like if you're holding a stainless steel tube with a coating, and it's in the air, for instance, holding it in your hand, then that is a capacitor. As such. But when you coat the tube and you put it in water, just like in air, then what happens is that when you put it in water, water now is the embodiment of the negative electrode to the capacitor. So you have a single stainless steel tube coated in a dielectric coating and water surrounding that coating, making it an electrode. And then the water bath has to obviously sit in something, and that also needs to have a connection to the circuit. So it does. There's another stainless steel tube which is inside the positive capacitor tube, and that other negative tube serves as nothing other than an electrode to the water. The water is the connection and the electrode of the capacitor. It's 1/3 of the capacitor, hence water capacitor. Right, Stanley Meyer's water capacitor. This is one of the cells. This is what people are doing. And what they've got is one stainless steel tube. Let's say it's charged up positive. And then they have the water. And then they have another stainless steel tube. And what they're doing is they're dead shorting the circuit, the voltage intensifier circuit, through this, what people call a water capacitor. Now, it's not really a capacitor as such because the water is conductive, and it being conductive, it means it just kills the circuit. So we move on to Now what this is quite simply a stainless steel tube, and it's charged with positive feed. And then if you coat that tube in a very thin dielectric layer, it could be a resin, it will be hard like a mica, and what actually happens is that just one single stainless steel tube with charge put in it and a coating becomes a capacitor. Even if it's in the air, it will attract charge from the air, negative charge from the air, and it will build up on this coating, and you will have a capacitance in this tube, one tube. It could also be dipped into water as well, but in the air it will have a capacitance, and you will be able to read it given the correct coating. Now, if I can get this to move, it's not going to do it, it's on paint. Well, now this is my take on what is going on with Stanley Myers. And what is happening is that he basically, has one electrode. The positive is normally the outer, but in this case it's the inner. And what he has done, he has coated the positive tube with a dielectric coating. It could be, like I said, a resin most likely. So what happens is that when he puts charge into here, then this single tube with a coating becomes a capacitor, and the outside of the tube becomes negative, and it is attracting negative charge. Then we put the water and the negative electrode, and what you have here is the water sitting in what is a unipolar, single pole, pulsed zone between the negative electrode and the charge that's gathered on this water capacitor surface. It's a positive charge, a dielectric coating, with the negative part being the water. The water is the electrode. This is a connection. So the water is an embodiment of a single tube capacitor with a coating, leaving the water to be pumped through a unipolar zone. Now here we have it here again. We've got the positive electrode, which has a dielectric coating, and the dielectric coating, when charged, becomes a capacitor. These three layers here, it's the stainless steel, the resin coating, and the water being an embodiment of this three-layered capacitor. And what happens is the water has to be passed through, similarly with the gas gun, a zone that is double negative. It's a unipolar zone at high static potential. And that potential is so high that the water is positive and negative, and the negatives have trouble passing through this gap and are repelled, and as they repel, they bounce off other negative electrons and start an avalanche effect in the water. And this is the unipolar pulse zone. This is positive electrode, dielectric coating and negative electrode with water passing through. Now, for true electron extraction, then you have to have the coating. Because what happens is that when the coil collapses and the diode is here, this area here is positively charged, and this coil collapses and it has another pulse. But on the collapsing coil, it wants to draw in more electrons. Now, there is no electrons can come from here because of the layer. The dielectric layer stops electrons. It's not connected to the water. So what happens is that when this coil collapses, it takes electrons out of the water here and brings them round to charge the coil. This being isolated, the water from the positive, it means that it is cornered and it cannot pick up any more electrons in the circuit. This coil is pulling the electrons out and in past the diode, and for the circuit to even out, leaving the water with an electron deficit. And this is what causes electron extraction and the breakdown of water and the supply of gases and spark ignition. So what actually happens is that the resonance that goes on, well, if you were to say there's a diode, so there is no free resonance, but the resonance is between the inductors and the capacitor, but it's not a dead short water capacitor. It's a capacitor that involves having a stainless steel electrode and a water electrode with film of dielectric coating, which means there is no dead short in the cell at all, which means that the load is no more than the capacitance and the resistance. So the negative electrode is placed in close proximity to the water capacitor, and as we know, it's on the inside, and Stan pumped water through the gap. Now, when the circuit is charged, then with the water being a negative connection, the embodiment of an electrode, which is 1/3 of the capacitor, then what happens is that you put in positive pulses and you bring up the positive electrode voltage, and that causes an attraction force of negative from the water. The negative side of the water attaches itself to the coating, which starts to increase a capacitance effect on the capacitor. As the capacitance effect rises with the incoming pulses, then more negative ends of the water molecule get attracted to this voltage potential, raising the capacitance more, and it gets to a point where, because what Stan called a waveguide is actually the negative electrode in close proximity, the water is basically jammed between a highly negative zone and another highly negative zone. So the water is getting pumped through a unipolar pulsed zone. Unipolar because there is no positive connection. All there is a negative, overwhelming negative connection. Now the water is like a wire. It's connecting, it's a wire and an electrode to this capacitor. So in the circuit, the water is a resistor. Depending on how clean the water is, that resistance value will change. So what happens is that Stan uses one tube with a coating and uses the water as the other part of the capacitor, charges it up, draws the water through a unipolar negative electrostatic zone, which is part of the capacitor. And the voltage potential, as Stan said, the connection in the molecules, the voltage potential there is very small per connection. And the voltage potential of this unipolar zone is so big that the positive, the attraction force of the negative charge causes a bombardment. And the bombardment, just like a fluorescent tube, essentially, electrons start to fly around and bump off other ones, and it's a charged and excited state to the point where you break the water down and release the gases, and can go further as well, but right now I'm just trying to explain that the capacitor is one tube, and the unipolar voltage zone is the gap between the negative electrode and the negative capacitor plate, which is the water.
First was to address how do we switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule and do it economically. And when you consider the formation of the water molecule, then when the two hydrogen atoms link to the oxygen atom to form the water molecule, under the law of physics something's got to happen, right? Now what actually happens is that this outer orbit of the oxygen atom normally has only 6 electrons in it. But this particular orbit will allow us up to 8 electrons to be occupied at one particular time. And as a result of this, this now allows the two hydrogen atoms to link up with the oxygen atom to form the water molecule to go into stable state. Now, on the law of physics, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, something's got to happen. Now, what actually happens is that when the two hydrogen atoms link up to the oxygen atom, and the oxygen atom accepts the hydrogen electron to set up the covalent bonding, then something's got to happen. And what happens is that under normal state, there's 8 electrons in the oxygen atom, and then there's 8 protons. But when the oxygen atom accepts the 2 hydrogen electrons, then there's an imbalance that occurs. And what now takes place is we have now 10 electrons, but we still have only 8 protons. And as a result of this, the oxygen atom takes on a negative electrical charge. Now, since the hydrogen atom is now sharing its electron to set up the covalent bonding, then the positive charge proton swings the hydrogen atom to the positive charge. Therefore, the atoms of the water molecule takes on electrical charge. Now, that was the second major thing that Faraday would have to know. Is in fact that the bonding, the two unlike atoms of the water molecule, is actually being held together by an electrical attraction force, and that electrical attraction force is equivalent to the 2 shared electrons.
So in other words, once it's all combined together, the total charge is 0.
Right. That the water molecule is stabilized to net electrical charge 0, but its atoms are opposite electrically charged. All right, so the key is now that what's holding these atoms together is this electrical bonding force Q and Q prime. And it is only equivalent to the two shared electrons, because on the law of physics says for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So we know now that it was very obvious then to say, hey, if that's the case, and these atoms do not take on an electrical attraction, then in fact it was obvious that if I've exposed the water molecule to a high external high voltage field, then we could pull apart the water molecule and do it economically. And the question is, does these unlike atoms take on an electrical attraction field? And they do not. And the reason why they do not do this is because the oxygen atom, those electrons are paired together and swing in opposite direction as they pair together. They cancel out their electromagnetic field, and as a result, there is no electrical attraction force between the two unlike atoms. So all we now have to do is to overcome the electrical attraction force of these two atoms. Based on Coulomb's and Newton's second law of electrical force with an electronic circuit. So what we had done now is set up and put an electric voltage field here, and an electric voltage field here. We do it this way. So now we set up an electrical field and expose the water molecule to a high electric voltage field and restrict the amps. Then, if this now is set up as a B plus voltage zone and this sets up as a B minus voltage zone, then under the law of opposite charges will do what? Like charges will repel, and unlike will attract. So therefore, if I put a B plus voltage field here, would not now the negative charge oxygen atom be attracted to that voltage field? Now, likewise, at the same time, would not, if I put a B minus voltage field here, would not the positive charge hydrogen and oxygen now be attracted to the negative voltage field? And as a result, now we're using voltage as a potential energy source and pulling apart. The water molecule starts to elongate. As you start to elongate the water molecule, you're now changing the time share rate of the electron, and as a result of that, you pull apart the water molecule. Now, there's another phenomena that is happening also, is that in the characteristic of water, it is a dielectric liquid. And because the electropolarization process of using voltage now to separate the water molecule, we now can use ordinary natural water and have it non-processed. But there's another feature to it, is that natural water is a dielectric liquid. And when you expose the water molecules to the high voltage zone, then what happens is that because of the dielectric properties of water, then the dielectric properties of water will now become electrically intensified. And so as it takes on an electrical charge, then the hydrogen charges will increase in their positive charge areas, and also the oxygen atom increases in its negative electrical charge. And so what happens now, that since you are increasing these electrically charges, being exposed to the applied voltage field, then the covalent electron switches off in the following way, that as this increases positive electrical charge, would not this negative charge covalent electron be attracted back towards the hydrogen atom? And since the negative charge oxygen atom is increasing in its negative electrically charged, would you not now have a repelling force being applied to the covalent bonding? And so as a result, when you tune in now on voltage, now you have the ability to automatically switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule. Now that now became a physical force in separating the water molecule, and voltage now becomes potential energy. Now in the field of physics, we know that voltage does in fact perform work. We've known this for quite some time. But heretofore, never anyone ever dreamed of using potential energy in the form of voltage to perform work in order to pull apart the water molecule. And Faraday would also have had the knowledge that in fact he had to have an electronic circuit, which we call the voltage intensifier circuit, that gave us the ability to switch off the amp flow and allow the voltage to take over in a dead short condition. Now, in all probability, if he had had this knowledge, then we'd have been on hydrogen many years ago. us to reduce amps outflow down to a minimum and allow voltage to take over that disassociates the water molecule on demand. And
東京大田区のプラントメーカー日本テクノ。日本テクノの大政社長が開発したこの攪拌機、従来のようなプロペラが回転するものではなく、低周波の振動で攪拌する。中の水は安定して循環するという。洗剤を入れても泡が全く立たない。一体なぜか。通常電気分解すると酸素と水素が発生する。しかし大政社長が過去にこの攪拌機を使ってメッキをしたところ、難点とされる大きな泡や水素の爆発が発生しなかった。
振動が伝わっているために表面張力が壊れてですね、泡が形成しようとっても壊れちゃうんですね。だから泡は作りたくても作れない状態がこの現象じゃないかというふうに言われてるんですね。
これをヒントにした大政社長、水に電気を流すと白い煙のようなものが、これは酸水素ガス。普通の電気分解だと水素と酸素のガスが別々に出てくる。このガスは振動攪拌機でないと得られない。
酸素と水素のガスがですね、元素がナノマイクロバブルになって出るところが従来のですね電気分解と全く違うんですね。そしてあと安全な酸素と水素の私の考えでは結合体のガスが得られると。
水素ガスは分子が細かいため容器などに保存しても漏れやすい。しかしこのガスは2年近く同じ圧力で保存されている。大政社長は酸素と水素2つの分子が結合し特殊な構造を作っているからだと考える。ガスの用途はまずバーナーの燃料だ。温度はおよそ700度で火の中では低い方だが、鉄板を切断できるほどのエネルギーに変わるという。さらに新たな用途も生まれようとしている。東京海洋大学の伊藤教授、7月に酸水素ガスを用いてある実験を成功させた。タンクに溜めた酸水素ガスを燃料に小型エンジンを動かすことができた。空気の取り込み口は塞いでいる。ガスの中に酸素があるため燃焼時に空気中の酸素が必要ないからだ。水からできた燃料のため燃焼後はまた水に戻り、有害な排ガスは発生しないという。
非常に安定な圧力を加えても爆発しないし、インフラとして整備して自由に給油と同じように給ガスができるような状況が作れれば、自動車の燃料として置き換わる可能性というのは十分にあって、
ガスの正体を調べようと大政社長は液化を試みた。酸素はマイナス183度、水素はマイナス253度で液化するが、このガスはおよそマイナス178度で液化した。
構造はわからないにしても新しい地球上で その水の第二の水ができた。エンジンとか発電機だとか今化石燃料に変わるものが水から作れてまた水に戻るというふうに、究極のね、地球を救うね、燃料ですよね。全ての燃料にしたいと。
解明できていない部分が多い酸水素ガスだが大きな可能性を秘めている。
Those fuel gases are now coming through this electronic injector system as you see here. So basically we're now feeding the ionized air from the gas processor. We're now also taking the water fuel gases that are now coming from ordinary water. We are now mixing it with the non-combustible gases and the ambient gases and regulating those control of the fluid mediums or for fluid mediums. As a result, now we can tune in and allow this engine to run off of natural water. This system's approach, this particular unit here is referred to as the VIC, or the voltage intensified circuit technology. This is being miniaturized down to a very small, lightweight system. This is demonstrated in our systems engineering approach on the technology that we can apply it to other applications, not only in the transportation area but also in industrial applications. So it was paramount that we would demonstrate and have the technology solved for design engineering, retrofitting to existing energy consuming devices, whether it's being run in an internal combustion engine or a diesel engine or hook it to an industrial process. So all of these design interfacing technology is now being solved. We are in the latter stages of what we call the pre-engineering system. Which will now allow us to miniaturize the technology once we're completed on the design applications and take it into mass production. I'll give you a classical example of this. We've also developed from this technology, which we call the water fuel cell injector. And basically, this injector now is a miniaturized water fuel cell or miniaturized resonant cavity. And this technology now allows us to simply replace, we can bypass this part of the systems approach and now simply replace the spark plug with the water fuel cell injector And as a result now, we can run the water up to the injector, which is now being processed and being exposed to a very high pulse voltage frequency. And as a result, as the water fuel is being going into the system, then the explosion takes place inside the cylinder. Therefore, it makes this an extremely fail-safe operable system. The cord that you see here is strictly hooks up to a very high intensity voltage pulse, and we restrict the amps to cause the electrical polarization process, which in turn the voltage amplitude now takes it and goes in the ionization state to perform the hydrogen fracturing technology, and then in turn the high pulse voltage frequency now allows the ignition of the gases. So therefore we do this electronically. And so this technology has taken us down to the water fuel cell water fuel injector, as you see here today, which gives us a very economical way of simply converting and running a conventional car on natural water. So basically what we do is we feed ordinary natural water in here, non-processed natural water. We now feed the ambient air gases being ionized. It's being mixed with the water. And then we mix the non-combustible gases going in the system that regulates the control, and so allows us now to release the thermal explosive energy from hydrogen and do it on a controlled means.
water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow. If you don't have any snow available to you, then use salt water because there's no adverse effect to the fuel cell.
Meyer started working on this project 4 years ago. He's not a scientist. He isn't even a chemist. In fact, he never graduated from college. Meyer was determined, he says, to design something to protect this country from oil embargoes.
And we've calculated that if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York,